In the summer of 2007, 9-year-old Tyler Greer vanished during a neighborhood game of hide-and-seek. One minute he was laughing behind the backyard fence, the next gone. Despite exhaustive searches and nationwide attention, no trace was ever found. His best friend, Danny, was the last to see him alive. But in 2018, during a routine counseling session, now teenage Danny whispers a sentence that makes the therapist's blood run cold. "I think I know where Tyler is, but I promised I'd never tell." The sun had just begun its descent beyond the treetops when the neighborhood children called out, "1, 2, 3, not it!" Their bare feet slapped against the grass as they scattered, laughter echoing down the sleepy cul-de-sac of Brookpine Court. Summer in Northridge, Illinois, was thick with fireflies and the scent of cut grass, the kind of season where time felt slower, suspended in the amber glow of childhood freedom. 9-year-old Tyler Greer darted behind the fence of the old Hensley property, grinning to himself. It was the best hiding spot nobody ever checked behind the tool shed. The boards were warped, and weeds reached nearly to his knees, but it was perfect. He crouched down, the thrill of the game tightening in his chest like a drumbeat. "They'll never find me," he whispered, a triumphant smirk tugging at his lips. Across the street, Danny Walters finished his countdown by the mailbox. "Ready or not, here I come," he shouted. His voice rang out, startling a bird from the eaves of the Johnsons' garage. Danny started running, checking behind bushes and under porches, calling names, laughing when he caught Emma behind her dad's pickup. But Tyler didn't come out. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Danny found everyone else. Emma, Javier, even timid little Ben, but Tyler still hadn't appeared. "Okay, game's over," Danny yelled. "You win, Ty." Silence. "Tyler?" His voice cracked. They checked the usual spots. The backyard trampoline, the woods behind the Miller house, the creek. Parents began to trickle outside, first amused, then puzzled. Then Susan Greer came running barefoot down the driveway, her face pale, her voice sharp with worry. "Where's Tyler?" "Two thought he was hiding," Danny stammered. "Where did you see him last?" she demanded. Danny's face flushed. "By the fence, behind the shed." Flashlights cut through the encroaching dusk. Neighbors scoured the yards and called his name, their voices rising with urgency. The police were called within the hour. A search dog arrived just after midnight. That night, fences were torn down, sheds were pried open, and the woods echoed with the sound of strangers calling into the darkness for a little boy who no longer answered. Behind the shed, the grass lay flattened, as if someone had crouched there. A sneaker print faced toward the woods, but beyond that, nothing. By morning, Tyler Greer was officially a missing child. By sunrise, Brookpine Court no longer resembled the quiet suburban pocket it had always been. Police cruisers lined the street, their red and blue lights casting a rotating glow over driveways and garden beds. Yellow tape cordoned off the Hensley yard, the overgrown grass trampled by too many boots. Tyler's bike still leaned against his front steps, untouched, its handlebars glittering faintly with dew. People came out in bathrobes and house slippers, drawn by the unspoken gravity of something terrible. Murmurs passed from porch to porch. Speculations and reassurances melting together like the early morning mist. "Maybe he wandered off," someone said. "He's probably sleeping in someone's shed." But nobody believed it. Not really. By 8 a.m., a full search operation had been organized. Volunteers checked in at a fold-out table in front of the Greer home, signing waivers and receiving fluorescent vests. The fire chief handed out grid maps. Police officers clipped radios to their belts and handed search dogs over to handlers. There were missing child posters already printing, though it felt obscene, like speaking a curse aloud. Susan Greer moved through the crowd in a daze, eyes red, lips pressed into a thin line. She held a small water bottle in one hand, though she never drank from it. Neighbors tried to comfort her, offering blankets, prayers, strong coffee, but she didn't seem to register them. Her husband, Mark, paced the sidewalk with a frantic edge. He kept asking the officers the same questions, over and over, as if the repetition might unlock a different answer. "I don't understand," he said for the 5th time. "It was just hide and seek. It's our street. You don't disappear on your own street." The first helicopter arrived just after noon, its blades thundering over the treetops as it began its sweeping pattern above the woods. The kids from the neighborhood were all kept indoors now, watching wide-eyed from second-story windows. The summer had turned cold somehow, brittle with dread. By nightfall, the search had expanded 5 miles beyond Brookpine. The dogs had picked up a scent trail near the creek, but lost it in the reeds. Officers flagged the area, scoured it with flashlights, and found only a plastic water pistol and a torn sock, neither of them Tyler's. At 10:42 p.m., the lead investigator called a temporary halt for the night. The dogs needed rest. The volunteers were exhausted. The woods would still be there in the morning. But Tyler wasn't. The morning after Tyler's disappearance, Danny Walters sat curled into the corner of his living room couch, a blanket draped over his shoulders, even though it was already warm outside. His knees were tucked to his chest, his face hidden behind a tangle of brown hair that hadn't been brushed since the night before. The television was on, but he wasn't watching. His mother, Carol, hovered nearby, clenching and unclenching a dish towel in her hands as if it were the only thing tethering her to the floor. "He's just tired," she told the officers who'd come to ask questions. "Didn't sleep much last night. None of us did." Danny didn't speak at first, not even when Detective Manning crouched in front of him and asked gently, "Hey, Danny, you want to help us find Tyler?" A pause. Then, a nod, almost imperceptible. Manning offered a small smile. "That's good. You're his best friend, right?" Danny's eyes flicked up, then down. Another nod. "Do you remember the last time you saw him?" Danny's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "He said he was going to hide good. He went behind the fence, and then he just ran into the woods." "Ran?" Manning's voice didn't change, but Carol stepped closer, frowning. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" she asked. "You didn't say anything about the woods last night." Danny just looked away, burying his chin deeper into the blanket. "He said I couldn't follow." The room was silent for a beat too long. Outside the window, a search team passed slowly down the sidewalk, bright vests glowing like fireflies against the morning light. Manning leaned forward. "Did something happen, Danny? Something you're scared to tell us?" Danny shook his head violently. "No," he said, his voice high and sharp this time. "I didn't do anything." "We're not saying you did," Manning replied carefully. "We just want to know everything, so we can find him." But Danny clammed up again, retreating into the folds of the blanket like a turtle into its shell. Nothing else would come out of him that day, or the day after. Tyler's name became something Danny wouldn't say aloud. He stopped playing outside. At school, he stared out windows and didn't raise his hand anymore. When his classmates asked about the game, about what he saw, he shrugged and said the same thing every time. He just ran. That's all. But there was a shadow behind his eyes when he said it, a tightness around his mouth. As if there were something else, something he didn't know how to say, or was too scared to speak aloud. And the silence that followed grew heavier with every passing day. The fourth day into the search, the forest had grown mean. What began as soft midsummer woods with birdsong and sun-dappled trails had turned into a damp, tangled place where every tree looked the same and every clearing felt like one they'd already passed through. The volunteers were thinner now, fatigue setting in, optimism waning, but the core group of officers remained, scouring the perimeter inch by inch. They no longer called Tyler's name. Not out loud. Detective Manning crouched near the eastern fence of the old Hensley property, squinting at a patch of broken brush beneath the wooden slats. The fence, brittle with age, had a jagged opening near the basia place where the wood had splintered outward, not inward, like something small had forced its way through from inside the yard. He brushed aside a clump of wet leaves. There, barely visible in the muddy earth, was the shape of a sneaker print. Small, child-sized. It faced toward the woods. Manning flagged the area, waving over the forensic tech with the camera. "Here," he said, his voice tight. "This could be it." The tech snapped photos from every angle, then gently placed a clear evidence frame over the print to preserve it. Around them, the forest loomed green and silent and endless. The air felt colder in the shadows here, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Back at the Greer house, Susan watched from the porch as a uniformed officer marked something on a clipboard, his eyes on the Hensley yard. She stood up, instinct already clawing at her ribs. She crossed the street barefoot, not feeling the heat of the asphalt beneath her feet, her voice trembling as she asked, "What did you find?" "They're just checking the perimeter again," the officer lied, too quickly. She didn't believe him. She pushed past the caution tape, ignoring the protests, and stopped short at the edge of the fence. Her eyes fell on the opening. Then, the print. She covered her mouth. "That's his," she whispered. "That's where he went." Detective Manning didn't correct her. He just nodded grimly. Later that night, he would sit alone in his car at the edge of the woods and stare into the trees, replaying the shape of that little print over and over again in his mind. It was the first real clue. But it also asked the cruelest question of all. If Tyler had made it that far, why hadn't he made it any further? Susan Greer had not changed her clothes in 3 days. She still wore the same pale blue sweatshirt Tyler had once called her cloud shirt. The fabric stretched and smudged now, marked by fingers that kept wiping away tears she never remembered shedding. The coffee in her mug was always cold. She just held it, like a prop from the life she used to have, the one where mornings began with cereal and lost socks and Tyler's shriek laughter filling the kitchen. Now, the house was hollow. Too quiet. Too clean. It felt obscene. She had taken to sitting in Tyler's room during the search hours, perched on the edge of his bed as if expecting him to come bursting through the door, flushed and breathless from a great adventure. His nightlight still glowed softly in the corner, even though it was midday. She kept it on now, always, just in case he came back in the dark and needed help finding his way. Mark, on the other hand, could not sit still. He paced the living room like a man walking the edges of a cliff, fists clenched, eyes bloodshot. The police updates, few and far between, now only pushed him further into a simmering state of agitation. "They're missing something," he kept saying. "They're looking in the wrong damn place. Someone's got him. Someone took him." Susan didn't argue. She didn't say what she was thinking, that maybe nobody took Tyler. Maybe he had wandered off too far. Maybe the woods swallowed him whole. Maybe... She didn't say it. She couldn't. Mark punched a hole in the garage wall on the 5th night. Susan didn't ask why. When she found him later, sitting in his truck with the engine off and his head against the steering wheel, she just opened the door and stood there, waiting. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. "He was right there," Mark said. His voice was broken glass. "In our yard, on our street." Susan knelt beside the truck, wrapping her arms around him as best she could. He didn't move. "I know," she said. "I know." They weren't grieving, not exactly. Grief required a certainty they hadn't been given. What they lived with now was worse, an open wound of possibility. Tyler could be dead. He could be alive. Somewhere between those two truths, Susan waited with a light on, and Mark burned with the guilt of every second he hadn't been watching. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both knew it. This was how marriages broke. Not all at once. Just piece by piece, in silence, under the weight of not knowing. The seasons came and went like ghosts after Tyler disappeared. First the leaves fell, as they always did, drifting in brittle spirals onto empty sidewalks and trampolines. No one bounced on anymore. Then came the snow, covering Brookpine Court in a hush so complete it felt like the world had paused to listen for the sound of a little boy's footsteps returning home. But spring bloomed anyway, and summer came again. And Tyler never did. By the end of the 2nd year, the flyers were mostly gone, faded by sun and rain, peeled away from telephone poles and coffee shop windows. The search parties no longer gathered in the mornings. The yellowed maps and lists of search grids had been filed away, replaced by newer crimes, newer tragedies. A new missing child from another town made headlines for a week, and when Susan saw the face on the news, she didn't feel outrage, she felt jealousy. Fresh grief was louder. People still cared about fresh grief. The Greers didn't move, but the people around them did. Quietly, subtly. Conversations at block parties softened or stopped when Susan walked up. Teachers looked uneasy when Mark attended PTA meetings. Invitations stopped arriving in their mailbox. Even tragedy had an expiration date in the suburbs. Danny's family moved in the fall of the second year. Not far just across town, to the other side of the river where the houses were older and no one knew the story of Brookpine Court by heart. Carol Walters packed their things in silence, carefully leaving behind anything that had belonged to Danny's childhood: his red bike, the faded plastic water guns, even the box of baseball cards he and Tyler had once traded under the porch steps. Danny didn't say goodbye to anyone, not even Susan, who watched from her window as the U-Haul pulled away, her hands curled tight around a mug of untouched tea. He had stopped speaking about Tyler a long time ago. At first he'd cried every night, whimpering apologies into his pillow. But by the time he turned 11, he had grown silent and small, folding into himself like paper. The whispers had followed him at school: kids asking what he'd really seen, teachers with too soft voices and too kind eyes. So when the moving boxes came, Danny didn't argue. He went. But he didn't forget. He never forgot. The dream started in winter, when the wind outside howled like it had a voice. Danny was 11 now, living in a different neighborhood with different curtains and different shadows. But the fear was the same. It clung to the corners of his room, thick and quiet, waiting for nightfall like a second skin. In the dream, it was always dusk. That purplish hour when the sky forgets what it's supposed to be. Danny would find himself standing in the woods, again those woods, the ones behind the Hensley fence, barefoot, with pine needles biting into the soles of his feet. The trees around him were impossibly tall, more like spires than branches, their limbs swaying though there was no wind. He could smell the moss, wet and deep, and the distant scent of something metallic. And Tyler was always there. Not as a ghost, not bloody or monstrous, just Tyler. Standing about 10 feet away in the half-light, hands at his sides, face dirty and pale. His hair was matted like he'd been crawling. There was a smudge across his cheek, the same one Danny had once wiped off with a spit-wet thumb during a field trip. "Tyler?" Danny would ask, his voice dry with disbelief. Tyler never smiled. He never moved closer. His lips barely moved at all when he spoke. "Why didn't you come back?" The first time he said it, Danny woke up screaming, tangled in sheets, sweat clinging to his skin like syrup. His mother rushed in, flipped on the light, asked what had happened. But Danny didn't answer. He couldn't. It felt wrong to speak Tyler's name in the daylight, like it would open something up that couldn't be closed again. The dream came again the next night. And the night after that. Sometimes Tyler was further away. Sometimes closer. Sometimes his voice was almost a whisper in Danny's ear. "Why didn't you come back?" Danny began avoiding sleep. He stayed up reading comics under the blanket with a flashlight until his eyes refused to stay open. He snapped at his parents. He stopped talking in class. His school counselor asked if anything was wrong at home. He said no. But every time he closed his eyes, the trees returned. And Tyler with them. Not angry, not quite sad either. Just waiting. "Why didn't you come back?" It was just a dream. That's what Danny told himself every morning, repeating it like a spell. But some nights, he woke with dirt under his fingernails. And no one could explain that. The candles on the cake melted into crooked wax rivers before anyone thought to blow them out. Susan stood in the backyard, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the plastic tablecloth, smoothing out wrinkles that no one else noticed. It was Tyler's 11th birthday. Or it should have been. The folding chairs sat mostly empty. A handful of neighbors had come out of politeness, people who still couldn't meet her eyes for long. One brought a bouquet. Another brought silence. None stayed more than 20 minutes. The cake was chocolate, the same kind Tyler had asked for every year. She'd ordered it from the same bakery, down to the frosting script, "Happy Birthday, Tybug." It felt absurdly cheerful sitting on the picnic table surrounded by the cold. The wind kept catching the edges of the paper plates, flipping them like startled wings. Mark stood apart from the others, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the tree line. He hadn't said much that morning, hadn't said much in months, really. They existed in the same space now but orbiting different planets. Susan in the past, Mark in the quiet rage of the present. No one mentioned the empty chair at the head of the table. No one asked why she'd brought out his favorite blanket and laid it over the chair back like he might get chilly when the sun went down. Susan lit the candles herself. 11 small flames flickered against the twilight, dancing like hopeful little ghosts. She didn't ask anyone to sing. She just stood there, arms wrapped tightly around her middle, staring at the glow until her eyes burned. "Make a wish," someone said quietly. She did. She wished for a boy with skinned knees and a crooked grin, for the slam of the back door and muddy footprints on the kitchen floor. She wished for one more game of hide-and-seek, one more chance to say you don't have to hide so far next time, sweetheart. At home, the table was already set. It always was. Tyler's plate yellow, with a cartoon rocket ship sat across from hers. His cup, too. She still poured water into it every night, still folded a napkin into a triangle the way he liked. Mark didn't comment anymore. He just ate in silence, staring past her, as though she were slowly becoming a ghost herself. After the vigil ended, Susan scraped melted wax from the frosting and cut a slice of cake. She placed it on Tyler's plate beside the peas he'd never liked and whispered into the quiet kitchen, "Happy birthday, baby." No one answered. It hadn't started as a secret, not really. Just something between them, Tyler and Danny, best friends since the first day of kindergarten, when Tyler shared his fruit snacks and Danny let him win at tetherball. By the summer of 2007, they had 100 games, 100 shared jokes, 100 rules no one else understood. But one game rose above the others. They called it shadow tag. It was simple, really. You had to tag the other person's shadow without them noticing. If you succeeded, they were it in secret. The point wasn't to run or scream, it was to outsmart, to sneak. Sometimes the game lasted hours without either of them realizing who'd won. Sometimes they both forgot who was it, but that only made it better. It wasn't about keeping score. It was about the thrill of knowing something no one else did. On the day Tyler disappeared, they were playing 2 games at once. The other kids thought it was just regular hide-and-seek, but Danny and Tyler had started shadow tag on the walkover. Tyler had whispered it while passing behind Danny's back. "You're it now," he'd said, grinning like he always did when he had a head start. Danny had spun too late, the sun already shifting, Tyler's shadow vanishing against the pavement. During the regular game, as the others scattered, Tyler had turned and given Danny a look half daring, half something else. Not fear, not quite, but something serious. And then, he slipped behind the Hensley fence, where they'd promised never to go alone. Danny hesitated. The Hensley property was off limits. Old, abandoned, weird. Parents had warned them about rusted nails and broken glass. But Tyler had insisted. "It's just part of the game," he said. Danny followed a few steps behind, heart thumping. He reached the fence and peeked through the boards, but Tyler wasn't there, just the weeds swaying and the sound of something moving deeper in the brush. And then Danny remembered, if your shadow got tagged while you were hiding, you had to go deeper. That was the rule. The deeper you hid, the harder it was to be found. It was what made the game fun. Dangerous. Real. Danny waited for Tyler to pop out laughing. He didn't. He waited 1 minute, then 2, then 10, and somewhere in those minutes the game stopped feeling like a game. He never told anyone about shadow tag. Not the police, not his parents, not even Susan when she cried in front of him. Because somewhere deep inside, Danny wasn't sure if he'd tagged Tyler's shadow that day, or if Tyler had tagged his. Danny stared at the soft light bar as it moved slowly from left to right, back and forth like a hypnotist's pendulum. The room was warm. Quietly the hum of the wall heater and the faint clicks of the therapist's pen between notes. He hated being here. Hated how small he felt every time he stepped into that office, how the couch swallowed him whole no matter how straight he sat. Dr. Kendall's voice was low, even, like someone guiding a scared animal closer to the edge of a cage. "We're going to go back to that day," she said gently. "You're not alone. You're here. You're safe. You're 17 now, Danny. Whatever you remember, You can handle it." He nodded stiffly, watching the light. Back and forth. "Start where it begins to feel real," she said. Danny swallowed. "We were playing. It was hide and seek. Everyone was there. Emma, Ben, Javier, Tyler too. He said he had a better hiding spot." The light continued. "He ran behind the Hensley fence," Danny added. "We weren't supposed to go there." "And did you follow him?" Danny blinked, lips parting slightly. "No, not at first." The pause was long. Dr. Kendall waited. "He told me to come too," he said. Danny's voice caught. His shoulders twitched as if something cold had touched the back of his neck. Dr. Kendall clicked her pen quietly, then spoke, slow and deliberate. "What happened after Tyler said, 'I dare you'?" The effect was immediate. Danny jerked upright like he'd been slapped. The light bar toppled off the table with a clatter. He gasped, arms pulling in close to his chest, his whole body coiled like a spring. I didn't want to," he blurted, eyes wide, darting around the room. "He told me I had to. It was part of the game. He said I was scared. I wasn't supposed to go that far." His breathing came fast, uneven. Dr. Kendall stayed calm, didn't move, didn't interrupt. "He pointed to the hole in the fence," Danny said, voice trembling. "He said, 'I dare you to go down there.' But there was nothing there, just dirt and trees, just—" His hands went to his face. "I didn't go. I should have gone. He said he'd wait for me." Silence fell over the room like a sheet. Dr. Kendall sat quietly, her pen still now. Danny lowered his hands, tears streaking his face. "I thought it was a game," he whispered. "But maybe he didn't." And for the first time in 8 years, something in his memory shifted and a door, locked tightly for so long, creaked open. The rain came down in sheets that night, pounding against the roof of the Harbor Youth Center like it was trying to get inside. Thunder rolled over the lake, shaking the windows in their frames. The power had flickered twice already, the fluorescent light stuttering above the common room, where a half circle of folding chairs faced a counselor no one was really listening to. Danny sat in the back, hood up, headphones around his neck, eyes fixed on a water stain in the ceiling tile. He hadn't said a word all evening. He rarely did anymore. Most of the kids there thought he was just another burnout with a quiet streak. They didn't know about Brookpine Court, or Tyler Greer, or the boy who had vanished mid-game and never came back. Or if they did, they didn't connect it to the tall, gaunt, 17-year-old who kept his voice low and his eyes lower. But something about the storm cracked something open. Maybe it was the way the thunder hit too hard, or the flickering light that made everyone's face look like it was underwater. Maybe it was the counselor's question too casual, too sharp. "What's something you regret not saying when you had the chance?" Danny's breath caught. His fists tightened in his lap. The room went quiet. A few kids shrugged. Someone mumbled something about a girlfriend. Another joked about stealing a bike. But Danny didn't laugh. He blinked, once, and then again, slower this time. His lips parted, then pressed closed like he was swallowing glass. "I left him there," he said. No one heard him at first, or maybe no one was paying attention. Then he said it again, louder, clearer. "I left him." One of the volunteers looked up from her clipboard. "Danny, what was that?" His voice was smaller now, like he was talking to himself. "He dared me. He said to follow. I didn't." "Who?" she asked gently, stepping closer. Danny's shoulders curled in. "Tyler, he's still there." The room froze. A second later, the lights flickered and went out completely, leaving everyone in a wash of gray shadows and breathless silence. But Danny kept speaking, barely above a whisper. "I think I know where he is. I promise not to tell." An hour later, the counselor filed a mandatory report. By sunrise, the local police were reading it with growing concern. For the first time in years, the name Tyler Greer was circled on a whiteboard again. And this time, someone was listening. The interrogation room wasn't what Danny expected. It wasn't cold steel and screaming detectives like in movies. It was plain off white walls, a buzzing light overhead, a paper cup of water sweating onto a metal table. The chair creaked when he shifted. He kept his eyes on his hands, fingernails chewed raw, knuckles white. Across from him sat Detective Callahan, older than most, her voice measured, almost maternal. She hadn't raised her voice once. "You said Tyler dared you," she said softly. "To go where?" Danny's throat was dry. He hadn't slept. Not really. After the storm, after the report, after the quiet drive with the officer who hadn't spoken except to offer him a granola bar, he had known this moment was coming. He just hadn't expected it to feel like this. Like he was confessing to a ghost. "The storm drain," he whispered. Callahan tilted her head slightly. "Where?" "Behind the fence," he said. "At the edge of the woods. The old one under the slope where the creek used to run. It was covered by leaves and boards, but we found it." She nodded gently. "Tyler found it?" Danny's eyes flicked up. "We both did. He said we should make it part of the game." "What game?" He hesitated. "Shadow tag. But it was different that day. He was serious. He told me to go down. Said if I was brave, I'd go first." "Did you?" He nodded. "Yeah. It was dark. It smelled like metal and wet rock. I crawled in a few feet, but it was too small. I couldn't breathe. I told him to forget it and started climbing out." Callahan leaned in slightly. "And Tyler?" Danny's voice cracked. "He said I was scared, said he'd go further than me." "And he did?" He nodded, slower this time. "He slid past me, into the tunnel. It was quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard him laugh, just once. Then nothing." "What did you do?" Danny's chest rose and fell with uneven rhythm. "I waited. I kept calling his name. I thought he was trying to scare me, that he'd pop out and yell boo or something. I even said, 'You win, Ty, you're the best hider,' but he didn't come out." Callahan's voice dropped. "So you left?" I thought he went out the other side, that he was messing with me. I looked around for him for a while, but then I went home." His voice broke on the last word. "I was 9. I thought it was a game." Callahan didn't say anything. She just wrote something down and pushed the water toward him. Danny didn't drink it. He just stared at it, as though something might crawl out of the cup and drag him back into the dark. Detective Callahan stood in the center of the overgrown clearing, the file in her hands thick with dust and time. The manila folder had been pulled from the cold case archives that morning, its edges frayed, corners curled like old leaves. Across the top, in faded ink, "Greer, Tyler, 2007. Beneath it, someone had added a sticky note in fresh pen, "Reopened per confession. See transcript." The forest had changed since the last time it was searched. The grass had grown higher, swallowing the path to the storm drain. Saplings now cluttered the slope where the creek had once trickled, dry and silent now beneath the weight of years. The boards Tyler and Danny had once shifted aside were still rotted and half buried in the soil, like the woods had tried to forget them too. "Bring the dogs," Callahan said. 2 handlers appeared moments later, leashes in hand, the cadaver dogs alert and focused. Their names were Bronco and Rhea, German shepherds with years of experience and a reputation for precision. They began their sweep at the mouth of the drain, noses low, tails stiff with concentration. The metal ring of the culvert yawned open like a forgotten mouth, rust streaking the concrete like old tears. Callahan stepped back as Bronco paused at the entrance. He sniffed, circled, then moved on. Rhea followed, entering the tunnel carefully, her handler crouched low behind her with a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness in a thin line, revealing slick stone and layers of dried leaves. Nothing else. No bones, no scent, no trace. They searched the ravine next, a shallow bowl of earth littered with fallen branches and crumbling beer cans from a dozen teenage hangouts over the years. The dogs moved in figure eights, covering every inch. But again, there was nothing. By late afternoon, the light began to thin. Callahan stood with her arms folded, watching the dogs return to their handlers. One of the officers removed his cap and ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched across his face. Could have washed away, someone muttered. It's been over a decade. Or we're still in the wrong place, another offered. But Callahan said nothing. She kept her eyes on the tunnel mouth, where the trees leaned inward like spectators holding their breath. She didn't believe the boy had lied. She believed he remembered something. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not perfectly. But something. The case was open again. That was all that mattered. A door had finally creaked ajar after 11 years, and now, all they needed was the light to find what had been hidden in the dark. It was a groundskeeper named Allen, hired by the city to clear brush from the south side of the ravine, who first struck something unusual with his shovel. He'd been working in silence for most of the morning, headphones in, music low, when the metal edge of his spade hit something harder than rock, a hollow thud. He frowned, crouched, and began digging with his hands. The soil here was too soft and, as he pulled back layers of leaves and tangled roots, a rusted metal curve began to emerge, crusted in dirt and years of decay. When he realized it was a pipe part of the same drainage system the police had been investigating the week before he called the non-emergency number. Within an hour, Detective Callahan was back at the scene, standing at the edge of a collapsed slope, eyes fixed on the half-exposed culvert mouth long buried by time and erosion. The entrance had caved in decades ago, likely before Tyler had even been born. No one had thought to search this side. It wasn't on any recent maps. The brush had hidden it completely. Forensics arrived with shovels, and the dig became slow and methodical. They cleared enough of the collapse to allow one of the smaller officers to slide in. She wriggled through on her stomach, flashlight secured to her chest, her voice crackling through a radio clipped to her collar. For a long while, there was only static and breathing. Then quietly, "You're going to want to see this." They widened the entrance enough to pull everything out carefully. First came an old canvas backpack sun-bleached, the fabric stiff. It had been pressed against the wall of the tunnel, half buried beneath a spill of damp earth. The name tag on the back had faded almost completely, but the first letter remained visible, a T. Inside were things that no child would have willingly left behind: a crumpled comic book, a juice box, long empty, a spiral notebook with a dinosaur sticker on the cover and a few pages still intact. On one of them, written in looping, uneven letters, "Day 1. It's dark, but I think Danny will come back soon." Detective Callahan didn't speak. She just reached out and ran a gloved finger over the edge of the notebook. The soil here had been disturbed once and never touched again. They had found the tunnel's end. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of the truth. The notebook was small, bent from years of pressure, its spiral rusted at the edges and warped like it had been clutched too tightly. When Detective Callahan peeled it open with gloved hands, grains of dirt fell from between the pages, like sand from an hourglass. Some of the pages were soaked through, the ink bleeding into clouds, but others had survived fragile sheets filled with uneven handwriting and crude drawings in pencil. The first page bore Tyler's name in block letters, scrawled across the top, with stars doodled around it. Beneath that, in a child's earnest script, was a heading, "Day 1. It's really dark, but I'm okay. I think I can crawl back out soon. I just have to wait for Danny to stop hiding. I think he's trying to scare me. He's good at that." There was a sketch next to the writing, a clumsy drawing of two stick figures sewn with wild hair labeled "Me," and one with shorter hair and a hoodie labeled "Danny." They were both smiling. The next entry was shorter, more jagged. "Still waiting. Yelled, but he didn't come back. I think I heard something above. It was too small for me to turn around. Going to sleep soon. It smells weird in here. I have my juice box." Callahan turned the page gently. The third entry was smudged but legible, as though Tyler had written it while holding the notebook in his lap, his hands dirty and shaking. "Woke up and it's still dark. My flashlight is blinking now. I think the batteries are bad. It's really cold." I yelled louder. No answer. I scratched the wall with my zipper so I'd remember where I was. I heard a drip-drip sound. "I think there's water. I want to go home." There was a drawing on the bottom corner of that page, too. It showed a tunnel, narrow and black, with a stick figure curled up at the end of it. The figure had a sad face. A jagged line above it said, "Exit?" with an arrow pointing upward. The last legible page had no full sentences, just phrases. Words scattered across the lines as if written in panic or exhaustion. "Danny? Still there? I'm scared now. Please come back. Please, please, please." Then, nothing. Callahan closed the notebook slowly, her fingers shaking despite the gloves. The room was silent around her, as if even the air refused to speak. A child had been trapped, had waited, had believed, and had been left with only a pencil and hope to mark his time. It started with a headline on a local blog Newbreak in 2007, "Disappearance of Tyler Greer," posted just hours after the journal was found. By noon, the story had moved from online whispers to bold text on evening news tickers, slotted between segments about weather warnings and rising gas prices. But once the journal entries were leaked, photographs of those pages, with their crooked handwriting and desperate "please" everything changed. By morning, vans with satellite dishes lined the quiet curb of Brookpine Court like vultures circling a carcass that had stirred. Reporters knocked on doors with wide eyes and rehearsed sympathy, asking neighbors how they remembered the boy who vanished and the one who watched him go. Most declined to speak. A few didn't. "Danny was always strange after that," one man told the camera, arms folded tightly across his chest. "Never looked you in the eye. Quiet. You wonder if he knew more all along." His quote ran on the evening news, alongside footage of volunteers from 2007 combing through the woods with flashlights. The clip ended on a freeze frame of Tyler's fourth-grade school photo, grinning, gap-toothed cheeks pink from sun or excitement. Underneath it, bold text, "Still waiting for justice." Danny's name wasn't supposed to be public, but it got out. A social media post from someone who recognized the name from school spiraled into a chain of comments, screenshots, and finger-pointing. A photo of him at age 12, taken during a field trip, was shared and reshared until it became the face of suspicion. At school, his locker was vandalized. Sharpie messages scrawled across it read, "Murderer and liar." He didn't react. He barely blinked. At home, Carol Walters unplugged the landline after the third voicemail that said they hoped her son rotted in hell. At night, she sat outside his door while he tried to sleep, listening to the way his breath hitched when he thought no one could hear. Danny didn't protest the noise. Or the anger. Not really. How could he? In some part of his mind, he agreed with them. He had left Tyler. Maybe not to die. Not on purpose, but he hadn't come back. He'd walked away. The town had been quiet for years, lulled into grief's long, slow forgetting. But now the name Tyler Greer burned like a flare, and everyone needed someone to blame. And Danny, silent and 17, fit too easily into the shape of guilt. The final page of the notebook was brittle at the edges, browned by damp and time, but the writing was still clear-etched in pencil with a firmness that stood out from the shakier lines that came before. Detective Callahan turned to it slowly, already bracing herself, as if the weight of what it might say could somehow pass through her gloves and into her chest. The top of the page was blank. No drawings, no date, just words. Danny said he'd come back. There was space beneath it, as if Tyler had paused, waiting, maybe listening for footsteps that never came. He promised. The pencil had pressed harder here. The loops of his letters were darker, more deliberate, like he needed them to be believed. Like he was writing not just to record something, but to hold someone accountable. But it's so dark now. 3 sentences, that was all. No explanation, no goodbye. Just the slow unraveling of hope captured in the last lines a child would ever write. Callahan closed her eyes. Somewhere above that tunnel, the world had kept moving. School bells had rung. Lawns had been mowed. Mail delivered. But Tyler had been there, in the dark, counting on the promise of a boy who had been too scared to crawl back in, too young to understand what it meant to leave someone behind. Later that evening, the journal was laid out in evidence under the harsh white light of the forensics lab. Every page was photographed, cataloged, sealed. but that last entry stuck with the team. It clung to their thoughts as they drove home. It hummed beneath their skin. Detective Callahan didn't sleep that night. She sat in her car outside the Walters house, engine off, windows fogging. She thought about what it meant to make a promise as a child, how easily it was spoken, how impossibly heavy it could become. Inside, Danny sat on the edge of his bed, staring at a photo of himself and Tyler from second grade. Tyler's smile was wide, fearless. His own was more reserved, like he was always holding something back. That part hadn't changed. He whispered the words aloud, not from memory, but from guilt. Danny said he'd come back. He closed his eyes, tried not to hear the silence that came after, tried not to see the dark. Susan read the journal in the corner of the police station, her hands trembling so badly that Detective Callahan had to steady the pages for her. They sat alone in a small, windowless conference room, the kind meant for quiet discussions and bad news. The pages were photocopies clean, preserved, but still it felt like touching something sacred. Like disturbing the ashes of a fire, long thought extinguished. She didn't cry at first. Her eyes moved from line to line, wide and unblinking, as if trying to memorize every stroke of Tyler's pencil. Each word hit like a hammer. It's dark, but I'm okay. I think Danny will come back soon. By the time she reached the last entry, her voice cracked open. A soft, awful sound escaped her lipsless, a sob then a gasp, like her body was trying to fold in on itself. Danny said he'd come back, he promised. But it's so dark now. She stood suddenly, the chair clattering backward. Her face was blotched, pale, except for the red blooming across her cheeks. He was waiting, she whispered, her voice rising with each word. He was waiting for him. Callahan tried to calm her, but Susan pushed past her and left the room. Down the hall, she found Carol Walters in the waiting area, seated beside Danny, who looked like he'd shrunk into his hoodie, barely visible. Susan stopped short, staring at them. For a long moment, no one moved. The air between them was dense, like before a thunderclap. Then Susan's voice, raw and shaking. "You left him." Carol stood slowly. "Susan, please? You left my son in the dark. You let him die, scared and alone." Her words cut through the room like glass. Danny didn't look up. His shoulders tightened, but he didn't defend himself. Carol reached for Susan's arm. "He was just a boy, too. He didn't know." Susan slapped her hand away. "You raised him. You knew something was wrong and you said nothing. For 11 years. Callahan stepped in then, gently but firmly placing herself between them. "Susan, please. Not here." Susan broke then, collapsing to the floor, her hands tangled in her own hair, her sobs rising in violent waves. "He was waiting for me," she cried. "I didn't even know he was waiting." Carol knelt down too, her own eyes filled with tears, but she didn't reach out again. There was no comfort to offer. There was only a mother with pages in her lap and a silence that could never be undone. The trees hadn't changed. Not really. Taller, maybe, denser in some places. But to Danny, the forest still looked exactly as it had on that day when the sunlight flickered through the leaves just right, and Tyler's laughter had echoed like wind through the branches. It was as if the woods had been waiting too, frozen in their quiet watchfulness, unwilling to forget what had happened here. He stepped carefully over the undergrowth, flanked by 2 detectives in plain clothes. No lights, no sirens. Just boots crunching through dry leaves and a quiet tension that thickened the air with every step. "This way," Danny murmured. They followed him off the main trail, down a slope worn more by deer than human footsteps. The brush pulled at their clothes. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker tapped hollowly at a tree. Danny didn't flinch. After a few minutes, he stopped. It didn't look like much, just a tangle of brambles and a fallen log choked with moss. But beneath it, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was the hollow opening in the hillside. Years ago, he and Tyler had discovered it together. It had felt like a secret doorway back then, something magical. Now it just looked like a wound in the earth. Danny knelt, pushed aside the vines with trembling hands, his breath caught. "It's here," he said. "We used to call it base for shadow tag. We never told anyone about it. One of the detectives crouched beside him. "You remember how to get in?" "There used to be a crawl space," Danny said. "Tyler found it. He said if we could fit inside, we could go anywhere. He dared me to go first. I didn't want to, but I did." He paused, swallowing hard. "I got scared. I backed out. He said that made me it. Then he went in after me, but he went deeper. I didn't follow." He turned to look at them for the first time since entering the woods. His eyes were glassy, but his voice was steady now. "I should have followed him. I should have screamed for help, or told someone what he did. I didn't think. I just thought it was a game." The detectives marked the area, flagged the entrance. The forensic team would be there within the hour. But Danny stayed behind, kneeling in the dirt, staring into the mouth of the dark tunnel he had once called a secret. And for the first time in 11 years, he didn't look away. The soil gave way slowly, as though reluctant to release its secret. The forensic team worked in silence, crouched beneath the low canopy where the collapsed storm drain ended in a shallow hollow. Hours passed. The sun crept across the sky, light filtering through the trees in thin golden spears. Somewhere beyond the clearing, birds chirped with indifference, unaware of the grief stirring just below the surface. Callahan stood a few feet back, arms crossed, jaw set. She'd watched dozens of digs like this before drug busts, bodies hidden in desperation. But this one felt different. It wasn't just a case. It was a question the town had been asking for 11 years, buried not in files or reports but in hearts that had refused to forget. Around noon, a soft exclamation drew her attention. "We've got something." The lead technician lifted a gloved hand, motioning for the others to pause. The team leaned in, brushing away the remaining clumps of earth with small, deliberate strokes. Slowly, the shape emerged. Thin, fragile, impossibly small. A partial rib cage, a shoulder blade. A child's bones. Tangled among the remains were roots, like the earth itself had tried to cradle him, wrap around him, keep him from being completely lost. The collapsed clay had preserved some pieces, warped others. Nearby, they found remnants of worn fabric cotton, faded blue. A sneaker, the sole still intact, the laces discolored but whole. Callahan crouched as the forensic pathologist gently unearthed a jawbone, tiny teeth still intact. "We'll send it to the lab for confirmation," the technician said, voice low. "But it's him. It has to be." No one spoke for a long moment. Later, the official report would confirm it through dental records. Tyler Greer, age 9, height 4'3", missing 2 baby teeth had been found. Callahan walked the perimeter alone after the team packed up. The forest was quiet again, untouched by sirens or flashbulbs, just trees and wind and the memory of a boy who hadn't made it out of the dark. She looked down at the scar in the earth, now ringed with tape and markers, and she thought about the last line in his journal. Danny said he'd come back. He had. But not in time. The courthouse smelled like dust and cold air, the kind that seeped in through the stone and stayed there, heavy and unmoving. Danny sat on the wooden bench outside courtroom B, fingers knotted together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His suit jacket didn't fit quite right. It had belonged to his father once. Taken in at the shoulder sand, he kept tugging at the sleeves, like they might shrink to match his shape if he just pulled hard enough. The town wanted him on trial. That much was clear. In the weeks since Tyler's remains were identified, headlines had used his name with a kind of venom reserved for people twice his age. The boy who left Tyler behind. He knew and said nothing. Comment sections lit up with words like coward and complicit. But Danny wasn't on trial. Not officially. Not legally. The district attorney had made a statement days earlier, reading carefully from a prepared page. Quote, "Given the circumstances, the age of the witness at the time of the incident, and the lack of criminal intent, we will not be pursuing charges." It didn't matter. The court of public opinion had already made up its mind. Inside the courtroom, the judge's voice echoed through the wooden panels as Danny took the stand. He didn't look at the audience, didn't scan the room for Susan Greer. He kept his eyes on the railing in front of him, like it might anchor him to the floor. The prosecutor was kind but direct. "Danny, you were 9 years old when Tyler dared you into the storm drain?" "Yes." "And you entered the tunnel first?" "I did." "Then left. And Tyler went in after you?" "Yes." "When did you realize he didn't come back out?" Danny's voice dropped. "Right away. I waited. Then I thought maybe he was hiding somewhere else. I thought it was still a game." The judge listened with a face carved from stone, hands folded on the bench, no gavel, no shouting, no drama. Just the cold procedural truth laid bare. When it ended, Danny stepped down from the stand and walked past the front row, where Susan sat with a tissue clutched in her hand. She didn't look at him, didn't nod, but she didn't speak either. And maybe that silence, in its own way, was mercy. Outside, someone shouted his name. Someone else called him a killer. But the judge's ruling stood: Danny Walters was not a murderer. He was just a boy who had run the wrong direction when it mattered most. Danny stood in the witness box with the kind of stillness that only comes from being completely drained. His hands rested on the wooden railing, pale and still. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet, not rehearsed, not theatrical, just tired, honest. The courtroom leaned in. "He was my best friend," Danny said. "I need you to know that." No one interrupted. "We had this game," he continued, "shadow tag. We made it up when we were 7. The rules changed all the time, and no one else really understood it. But it was ours." He paused to breathe, just once. "That day, we were playing hide and seek with the other kids, but he said we should play our game too, secretly. He tagged my shadow when no one was looking and whispered, 'You're it.' Then he ran behind the fence." His throat tightened. He swallowed hard. "He dared me to go into the tunnel. I didn't want to, but he said I was scared. So I did, just a little way in. It was narrow and smelled like metal. I got spooked, so I crawled out. Told him he could win. I didn't care anymore." Danny looked down at his shoes. The courtroom was silent. "He said he'd go further, just to prove he was braver. I told him to be careful. He said, 'I dare you to come back for me.' He was smiling when he said it. I thought he was just being Tyler." He looked up now, and for the first time, met Susan Greer's eyes. "I waited. 5 minutes, maybe 10. I called his name. Then I thought he'd gone out the other side, or maybe ran off as a joke. I looked for him, but not really. Not hard. Then I went home." The next sentence landed like a confession. "And I lied." He didn't try to explain it away. "I told everyone I saw him run into the woods. I said I lost sight of him. I didn't say anything about the drain, about the dare, about the part I played. I thought if I said it out loud it would mean I let him die." He took a long, shaky breath. "That lie followed me everywhere. It sat with me at lunch, it walked beside me to school, it whispered to me at night. I didn't know how to live without it. I didn't know how to say I was just scared." A pause. "I still am." No one clapped. No one cried out. But something shifted in the room just slightly, like grief, exhaling. And for the first time in years, Danny felt the weight of his silence begin to lift. The courtroom felt colder when Susan stood. The air stilled, as if everyone instinctively knew something was about to be said that would not be easy to hear. She didn't look at the judge, not at the gallery. Her eyes were on Danny, seated just feet away, pale and still, his shoulders hunched like someone waiting for a blow. Susan walked slowly to the front, gripping a single piece of paper in her hand, though she never looked down at it. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady, not the trembling sorrow people expected, but the controlled weight of a woman who had carried something too heavy for too long. "I've imagined this moment for 11 years, she said. "Not in a courtroom, but in dreams, in nightmares, at the kitchen sink while washing a plate Tyler used to eat off of, in the back of my mind when I heard children laughing and wondered why one voice wasn't there." She paused, swallowing, but did not waver. "For a long time, I thought not knowing was the worst thing that could happen to a parent. The endless possibilities. Was he scared? Was he in pain? Was he alive and waiting for someone to find him? She looked toward the gallery for a moment, then back to Danny. I know now. She stepped a little closer, but not too close. I know my son died alone, in the dark. I know he waited. I know he hoped someone would come for him, and no one did. I know you were scared, Danny. I know you were 9. And I know you didn't mean to kill him. Danny flinched at that word. Kill. She said it without rage, but it still landed like a stone. I don't hate you, Susan said, and her voice cracked just slightly. But I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's not something I can hand out like a verdict. It's not a switch I can flip. She took a breath, steadied herself again. But I do know where my son is now. I know what happened to him. And that matters. That matters more than I ever imagined. She folded the paper in her hand and placed it on the ledge of the witness box, though she hadn't read from it once. Then she turned and walked back to her seat, each step echoing louder than the last. Forgiveness might come one day, or it might not. But truth had arrived, and in its own quiet way, that was enough. The oak tree stood tall at the edge of the trailhead, its massive limbs casting dappled shadows across the clearing where the community had quietly gathered. It was the kind of tree children used to race past on their bikes or sit beneath with popsicles in hand. No one had ever thought of it as a place for endings until now. The town had agreed on the location. Not in the cemetery, not beside the highway memorial cross or under marble with dates etched in stone. Here, where the forest began, where Tyler had last played. Where the path home had once seemed just a few steps away. A simple plaque marked the spot. Tyler Greer, 1998, 2007. You are no longer lost. The grave was shallow, not out of disrespect, but because the ground had already been broken, both literally and metaphorically. Beneath the fresh-turned soil were bones that had waited more than a decade to be seen again. There was no casket, just an urn nestled deep into the roots of the oak. Susan had insisted on cremation. Too much time had passed for anything else. People came quietly. No camera crews this time. No reporters with notebooks poised for grief. Just neighbors with thermoses, classmates now grown, teachers who remembered his laugh. Even Emma and Ben, who had been there that day, now 20, and awkward in their formal clothes, stood near the back. Danny came too. He stood apart from the others, close enough to hear the words, far enough to honor the silence between him and the family he'd hurt. He clutched a small paper airplane, something Tyler used to make from homework sheets, and sail across the classroom. He didn't throw it. He just held it, like a prayer folded too tightly to let go. Susan and Mark stood beside the tree, their hands clasped. Susan wore a pendant with Tyler's picture in it, no bigger than a thumbnail. She didn't speak to the crowd, only nodded as the minister read the final blessing, and a soft wind moved through the leaves above them like breath. When the service ended, people stepped forward, one by one. Some left flowers. Others placed small items in the dirt drawings, trinkets, scraps of memory. When it was Danny's turn, he approached slowly, knelt beside the tree, and pressed the paper airplane into the grass. He whispered, "You win, Ty." Then he stood, and the forest listened. The trail was quieter than Danny remembered. The trees had grown taller, the path more worn, but the wind still moved through the branches in that soft, whispering way, like it was trying to speak without words. The oak at the trailhead looked the same, though unchanged in its quiet watch, roots wrapped around the grave that marked the end of a boy's story and the beginning of Danny's. He was 20 now, older in years, but still carrying the weight of that one day in July like it had only just happened. His shoes crunched softly on the gravel as he approached the tree. There was no ceremony this time, no crowd, just Danny, a folded letter in his hand, and the sound of birds high in the canopy above. The plaque at the base of the oak was worn slightly from weather, but the words remained clear. Tyler Greer, 1998, 2007. You are no longer lost. Danny crouched down and laid the letter gently against the stone. He sat beside it, legs crossed like they had when they used to play video games on Tyler's living room floor, and stared at the earth. It didn't look special, just a patch of green with scattered leaves. But he knew what lay beneath it: bones, ash, memory. "I wrote this last night," he said aloud, voice barely louder than the breeze. "Tried 3 times to get the words right. I don't know if I ever did." He exhaled slowly. "I think about you every day, Ty. Not just about what happened, but about you, your laugh, the way you hated ketchup on your hot dogs, how you used to hum when you were trying to concentrate." His hand trembled slightly as he reached out to rest his fingers against the plaque. "You were my best friend," he said. "You trusted me. And I left you there." The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. "I can't take that back," he added. "But I can keep remembering. I can make sure no one forgets who you were, not just the kid who disappeared. You were more than that." A gust of wind moved through the trees then, rustling the leaves above him. Danny looked up. For a moment, he thought he could hear the echo of a boy's laughter in the branches. "I hope you're free now," he said. Then he stood, gave the grave one final glance, and walked back down the trail, the letter fluttering slightly in the breeze behind him.